Okay, Shiloh, like I said earlier on, the one thing that is quite sort of amazing, and there's a bit of a mystery maybe to it as well, is that some bands in certain genres of music, some bands just sort of excelled past everybody else. What I mean, we had, like I said, we had in the rock and roll era, we had certain people that excelled there. And then we, of course, in the prog rock, what I mean, you made mention earlier on of Genesis, but Pink Floyd became so big, and like with certain bands like the Grateful Dead, they just sort of went past any expectation. And why was that? What I mean, was it due to just simply good marketing? Was it really because they were such great showmen? What was the reason for that?
I think we have to understand that music is a reflection of the unseen, something people don't often harp on. And there is sometimes a spiritual phenomena which most musicians would denounce. And I take the Beatles, for example. I mean, the Beatles up to 65, 66 were largely covers, and I don't think they were particularly good. They had good melody hooks. There were a lot of good bands, Marmalade, some very efficient musicians around, the Searchers. But I've spoken to many people about the Beatles, and it just kind of like, it was like a phenomena. And I think there are phenomena. I mean, there are musicians in this world that are phenomena, or producers, like, and I think, you know, people like Ennio Morricone, for example, or David Bowie, that have transcended generations of music, are certainly a phenomena of the times. And the Beatles were a phenomenon of the times. They had a Mersey invasion of the world. And I think it was rather spiritual, because you couldn't really pinpoint incredible musicianship, certainly some very capable, but incredible musicianship in overall. And that being said, you know, as I said before, doesn't mean that if there's no Olympic musicians in a group, they're not a bad band. I mean, I love Badfinger. I love the Doobie Brothers, the early phase of the Doobie Brothers, and there wasn't nobody there that in particular, or the Creedence Clearwater Revival, that particularly you could mark up there with the top of the top. They were tight musicians, but they were great bands. They worked together very well. And I think the Beatles kind of worked, and sheer over-giftedness and possibly bulged to the proportion that, you know, they could not have actually gone further, where the Stones hurtled into blues and glammy type rock, you know, in the 70s. The Beatles did the right thing, and, you know, Paul McCartney did some great things with Wings, and Georgie brought out some great albums, and Ringo, bless his soul, did also some great songs and movies and so forth. So, yeah, I would say that if you look at it in that capacity, Lennon, of course, you know, certainly if any of the Beatles were a phenomena, I would probably say John Lennon. They were great songwriters, you know, although they kind of peaked at the very latter stages, which was sad. But there are phenomena and gifted artists, and you mentioned Floyd. Sid Barrett of Floyd, I mean, the Archeal Pipe at the Gates of Dawn, which is probably England's most primal psychedelic album. To me, he was a misunderstood genius. You'll see a post up there signed by him. And there were people like this, misunderstood genius. I mean, when Sid Barrett disembarked, I like that word, from the spaceship, Floyd was in a disarray. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know which way they were going. They were hobbling along with soundtracks, and certainly one or two of them, particularly obscured by Klaus Lafayette that you mentioned early on, I thought was pretty much an underrated album. For me, the pinnacle of Floyd will always be Atom Heart Mother. I believe what Ron Geeson did there with Floyd was classically a marvel. But I know everybody pinpoints the quadraphonic album Dark Side of the Moon as their sort of, and it certainly was their breakthrough in high fidelity. I didn't think it was that marvelous. Never have. The same way that Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull didn't think that Aqualung was a marvelous album, even though people also tend to forget Aqualung was conceptual. But I didn't think it was a marvelous album either. I thought Stand Up and Benefit towered above them. But in the same token, Dark Side of the Moon, for some reason, and I don't know why, I mean, I know they did some pretty amazing stuff on the recordings, but so did many. I mean, Tubular Bells is a good example. Mike Oldfield, I think Tom Newman did some, on the production side, did marvellous work there, you know. So I don't...
And of course Alan Parsons too, because he was also involved as a sound engineer.
Early days, but I didn't see that kind of... I still didn't think Alan Parsons was that particularly involved. You know, I still don't understand why, you know, I mean, I loved Animals, you know, the anti-Thatcher turbulence of Animals.
Remarkable album.
Exactly, and even, you know, I mean, Wish You Were Here had Roy Harper coming in on the vocals. You know, I don't know why Dark, I still believe Atom Heart Mother. And for me, the pinnacle of Floyd is Echoes of Metal.
Yes.
Which was used, believe it or not, a lot of people don't know this, the Underwater Adventures of Jacques Cousteau. He used that particular music. But then again, if you look at Metal and you look on the other side, it was a little bit hobbed together. If you take Echoes out of it, and maybe one or two other tracks, you didn't really have a good album.
They had tracks like Saint-Tropez.
It didn't work for me, you know. It didn't work for me. I always felt it should have been better off on a soundtrack album like More or something.
Yeah.
But definitely, I mean, More was the Ibiza drug encounters. The movie was actually better than the music, to be honest. But, and then of course, you know, if you're going to talk to me about the double album, I don't know. The double, you know, Amagama.
Yeah.
Look, Amagama. I'm not going to make a comment about Amagama.
And A Nice Pair.
Well, A Nice Pair was really the combination of Saucer Full of Secrets,
yes,
which I don't think sold as well as Pipe at the Gates of Dawn. They put it together, but Saucer Full had some really good songs. But then also it was the downfall of the disembarkation of Syd Barrett. So it kind of got a bit offish, you know, a little bit strange. But still, there was some peak moments of genius there. Syd Barrett was a genius, like Skip Spence. There was various geniuses in the world. What I call phenomenally, that weren't recognised, you know. I can go up to Lee Clayton in the early 80s, or I can go back into the 60s and I can pinpoint certain musicians. Arthur Lee of Love. I mean, these guys were very gifted musicians and now being given acknowledgement. But certainly Floyd, for me, as a prog rock band, yeah, I know they were the kings of prog. I don't regard them as the kings of prog, but they certainly got the limelight, so to speak.
Would you say at the time, live at Pompeii, for the big screen, what I mean, but would you say that actually...
Just give me any Gravy Train album, give me any Audience album except Lunch.
That's a name we haven't mentioned.
Thank you.
These conversations, Gravy Train, Staircase to the Day.
I mean, beautiful. Give me that album before Pompeii. I mean, with all due respect. I mean, Live at Pompeii was a pinnacle in the Floyd's capacity of soundtracks and playing to no crowds, the space orientation of that, and almost moving into a minimalism approach.
Yeah.
But quite honestly, you know, come on, guys, get real. Give me a Phonograph generator over Pompeii. I mean, and let me tell you, I can tell you now how many of you prog guys would agree with me. Think really about that in a close way. So, yeah, that Phenomena is the name of the game.
While we're at Floyd, we've seen through the years.
You enjoy Pink Floyd?
Yes, of course, yeah. But I won't mention it now because it's not about me; it's about Floyd. But the thing is, through the years, we've seen with some of the really bands in the front that there was always like some animosity between members. We know about Deep Purple, Ian Gillan versus Richie Blackmore. We had in Floyd, we had David Gilmour.
You hear the dogs wailing when you mention the animosity.
And the animosity.
The dogs are wailing, okay.
Yeah.
It's Waters wailing at Gilmour.
Roger Waters, Gilmour.
It's Gabriel wailing at Genesis, you know. It's actually sickly. You know, we make gods out of rock and roll musicians, they're humans. That being said, I do understand that a musician's life is like a looking glass. If I look at the amount of bad rapport I've had with a few people in the last 2 years, I could certainly fill up a little trench coat or a little bag. Now sadly with a rock musician, if a rock musician has a bad relationship with another rock musician, the whole freaking world gets to know about it.
Yes.
And it's quite sad, because they're also just humans, and we often see them as gods. string-driven thing made it very clear. God is not a rock and roll musician.
Yeah.
Another great band, Scottish string-driven thing, and Beggars Opera, pinnacle prog bands. Give me Beggars Opera way above bloody Pompon, okay?
Yeah.
With all due respect, okay? But what I will say is that it's sad because many of us, you know, I remember going to get a signature from Gilmour, and he would only sign his solo albums, he wouldn't sign a Pink Floyd album. My mate Peter Paulson, well-known producer, I actually don't know what happened, he won't talk about it, but he mentioned Genesis to Peter Gabriel, and all hell broke loose. That is just pathetic. I mean, Gabriel claims he walked out of the machine, but Gabriel is Genesis whether he likes it or not. It's blood, it's your heritage. It's like somebody is Jewish claiming they're not Jewish. You can't escape it. You can't escape your family, you can't escape your heritage.
And
You
your
grew up
past,
in,
yeah.
Exactly. So it's really, you know what, I think it's just these guys that make too much money. They get pedantic, they get finicky, they get fussy, they get bloody moody, and quite honestly, get it together. You know what, that's why too much money, you lose it. Roy Harper said it. You know, you go into the villages with the dogs and the people, and they all eat together, and they all got it together.
Yeah.
But now these guys sit in their little mansions in America, on some tropical island, they don't talk to each other. You know what, get together with bread on the table, and get your trip together, brother, because naked we enter, naked we leave. And I think Robert Plant will agree with Robert Plant will agree to that, you know.
Yes,
You know?
yes.
But yeah.
Yeah, but like the other question that comes to mind while we're talking about these infighting and animosity and all sorts of things is, of course, if we look at a band like like Cream, where there was this infighting all the time apparently between Ginger Baker and also Jack Bruce. Don't you think that if that wasn't there, maybe Cream would have had some longevity? They would have maybe made the 70s or even made the 80s.
Look, I do believe...
Or were they like Destiny?
I met Ginger Baker. I was kicked off his farm quoting on cameras, you know, having him settled in South Africa, and me being in the security industry by day. Ginger Baker, and I do feel sorry for him, in the sense that he's a fabulous drummer, a great jazz drummer. And I said to him, you know, your Air Force days and your stuff with Graham Bond were phenomenal. He's not a rock drummer, he's a jazz drummer, and they played a lot of blues. But, you know, he's not a nice man. You know, it doesn't take a lot to be nice. And some people grow old and they grow bitter, and I don't, you know, he obviously is angry that Pete Brown and Jack Bruce, my God, they were the guys who wrote the song.
They got the
They
royalties.
deserve the royalties. You know, so of course he errs more towards Clapton being a friend, but it's all about money really, and you know, I just think Ginger could try and lighten up a bit and be a bit more of a nice guy. You know, it doesn't matter how much money you've got and how much famous you are, but sometimes you worship a musician, then you meet him, oh my God, you walk away and you never want to act, you actually puts you off forever. And this has happened a few times in my life. I mean, go and try and, I mean, Van Morrison can do that to you, believe me. You actually hate the Irish after you, I'm Irish blood and you hate the Irish after you met Van Morrison. He's just a, I think, yeah, but then again, so's my neighbour. Whatever, you know, so it's just that he's got a name, and you do get people that are ugly in this world. But like I said, it doesn't take much to be a nice guy. Believe me, guys, the older you get, you don't want to be known as a moody old man. I mean, ask Vivian Stanshall. Vivian Stanshall? Vivian? Bonzo Dog Band.